When you realize your own child might be planning your death, there isn't a scream loud enough to describe it. The sound doesn't come out of your mouth. It starts somewhere deeper, in the place where you once believed you were safe because you were loved. My name is Elaine Whitaker. I'm 70 years old. I've lived in this same Ohio house for 42 years. It's the one my late husband David and I saved every penny to buy so our children would have a backyard to play in. I raised Mark and Anna here, watched them grow up under the maple tree, patch their skinned knees, dried their tears after the high school heartbreaks. I used to think that counted for something, that it meant no matter how life turned out, they'd remember I'd been their constant, their anchor. But the truth is, some people remember everything you give them only long enough to figure out what more they can take. It was a Wednesday morning when the phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my tea cooling in front of me, the newspaper open to the crossword I couldn't quite concentrate on. When the call came, the screen flashed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't pick up, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Mrs. Elaine Whitaker," the voice said, bright and practiced. "Yes? This is Jeffries and Monroe Insurance Group. We're calling to confirm beneficiary details for your policy update." I blinked. Sure, I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. My policy update?" "Yes, ma'am," the man continued. "Your life insurance policy number ending in 4329, was recently increased to $500,000. We're required to confirm primary beneficiaries and your date of birth." I felt my heart stumble in my chest. My voice came out thin. "There must be a mistake. I don't have a policy like that." There was a pause. Papers rustled on the other end. "Our records indicate it was issued 3 months ago. You're listed as the insured party, with Mark Whitaker and Anna Lester as the policy holders. You are aware of this, correct?" My mouth went dry. I couldn't get the word no past my lips. "Ma'am?" I swallowed. "I'd like you to send me all documents you have on file," I said carefully, forcing my voice not to shake, "to my home address." "Of course." He verified my information and ended the call, sounding as though he had no idea he'd just changed the course of my entire life. When the line clicked dead, I realized my hand was trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped from my grip. I set it down, staring at the grain of the table until my vision blurred. Mark and Anna, my own children. My mind rushed back through the past few months, searching for any clue. I remembered Anna insisting she needed me to sign some paperwork. "Just a medical release, Mom, in case you ever get sick." I'd signed it while she tapped her foot, checking her phone. Mark had been coming by more often, too, always asking if I was feeling okay, always steering the conversation to my health. A part of me wanted to believe this was nothing, that they'd done it out of concern, a misguided attempt to plan ahead. But another part, the part of me that still had a survivor's instincts, felt something colder lurking behind it. I pressed my palms flat to the table to steady myself. My wedding ring caught the light, and for a moment I thought of David. How he used to say, "We built this family brick by brick," and how I'd believed that meant it was solid. I didn't feel solid. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. I picked up the phone again and called Anna. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with practiced sweetness. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" "I just got a call from an insurance company," I said, hearing the edge slip into my voice despite my best efforts. "They said there's a policy in my name. $500,000. There was a beat of silence so slight I almost missed it. "Oh, that," she said lightly. "Mark and I thought it would be smart, in case something happens. It's just responsible planning. You didn't think to ask me?" "It's standard, Mom, really." I closed my eyes. My pulse was thudding in my ears. "I'd like to see the paperwork." She sighed, the way she used to when I wouldn't let her stay out past curfew. "You're overreacting." "I don't think I am," I whispered. "Fine," she snapped, and hung up. I sat there in the silence, the old refrigerator humming behind me, and thought of all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, all the times I'd emptied my savings to keep her afloat. And now she and her brother had taken out a policy on my life without telling me. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the uneven beat of my heart. I didn't know exactly what they were planning, but for the first time I believed it might be something I wouldn't survive. The envelope arrived 3 days later. I almost didn't open it. I'd set it on the counter and walked past it over and over, like if I ignored it long enough, it might turn out to be nothing. But nothing doesn't come certified mail. Nothing doesn't weigh heavy in your hands. When I finally sliced it open, I laid each page out in a neat row across the kitchen table. My kitchen, where I'd once packed Mark's lunches and taught Anna how to read. My kitchen, where everything felt safe. At the top of the first page was my name, Elaine Margaret Whitaker, my date of birth, my social security number, the address I'd lived in for over 40 years, my signature at the bottom, except I hadn't signed it. I traced the shaky scrawl with my fingertip, bile rising in my throat. Whoever had forged it had been in a hurry, or maybe thought I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But I knew my own hand. I knew every loop, every careful stroke. I turned to the second page beneficiaries, Mark Thomas Whitaker, Anna Elaine Lester, equal distribution. The third page was a breakdown of premiums and payout amounts. $500,000, enough to pay off all their debts, enough to make me worth more to them dead than alive. My vision blurred. For a long moment, all I could see was the wood grain of the table and the glint of my old wedding band. I thought about last Christmas. Mark sitting across from me telling me he was struggling to keep the shop open. Anna swirling her wine, complaining that the divorce settlement had left her tapped out. I'd listened with the sympathy. I'd written checks I couldn't really afford because that's what mothers do. We give and we tell ourselves it's love. I sat back, the papers fanned out in front of me like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized was underway. My hand was shaking so badly I pressed it flat against my chest to still it. I picked up my phone and called Mark. He answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. "Yeah? Mark," I said carefully. "I have the paperwork from the insurance company." A pause. Just a breath, but long enough. "Mom, I told you it's nothing to worry about." "You forged my signature." My voice came out small, like I was saying it to myself more than to him. He sighed, the way he used to when I caught him sneaking in past curfew. "It's not a big deal. You don't understand how this stuff works." I swallowed. "I understand that if I die, you get $500,000. Another pause, and this one felt deeper. "It's called being prepared," he said finally, his tone flat. "You're not getting any younger." I pressed my hand to my mouth so I wouldn't sob. My own son, the boy I'd held when he was sick, the boy I'd protected when his father died. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered. "It's just paperwork, Mom." "I don't believe that," I said, and hung up before he could say anything else. I sat in the quiet kitchen, the refrigerator humming behind me, the walls suddenly too close. My heart was hammering, like it was trying to warn me, get out, get safe. They don't love you the way you think they do. A knock at the back door made me jump. My neighbor Shirley stood on the porch holding a container of soup. She took one look at me and set it down. "Elaine, you look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. "Just a lot on my mind. Can I come in?" I nodded. She stepped inside and glanced at the papers spread across the table. Her eyes narrowed. "What's all this?" I told her everything. I hadn't meant to, but once I started, it poured out of me. The call, the signatures, the way Anna and Mark's voices had changed when I confronted them. When I finished, I realized my hands were clamped so tight around each other that my knuckles were white. Shirley was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and covered my hands with hers. "Elaine," she said softly, "you can't pretend this isn't serious." "I know. You need to talk to someone. A lawyer, the police maybe." I shook my head. "I can't. What if I'm wrong? What if this is all some misunderstanding?" Shirley looked me straight in the eyes. And what if it isn't? I stared down at the forged signature. My name twisted into something I didn't recognize. I don't know what to do, I whispered. You start by protecting yourself. She helped me gather the papers into a folder. As she left, she squeezed my arm. You're not alone, she said. I watched her cross the yard back to her house, the late afternoon sun slanting across her shoulders. But when I turned back to the kitchen, the quiet was so heavy it felt like it might crush me. And deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't safe. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, the folder clutched in my lap like a shield. Every time the furnace clicked on, I flinched. I kept thinking about that voice in my son's ear when I'd called, flat, unbothered, as if my life were just another asset to manage. By dawn, my mind felt scraped raw. I kept replaying Shirley's question, what if it isn't a misunderstanding? Around 9 o'clock, Anna called. The sound of her name on the screen made my stomach clench. I considered letting it ring, but I knew if I didn't answer, she'd just come over. And I wasn't ready for that. Her in my house, smiling, that too bright smile, telling me I was being silly. I pressed accept, but didn't say anything. Mom, she said, that syrupy tone she saved for when she wanted something. I was thinking, maybe we should go have lunch today. Just you and me. We can talk about all this. I swallowed. Lunch. Yes, let's clear the air. You're upset, and I understand. But you have to see this isn't a big deal. A memory flashed, her voice on the phone the night before. It's just paperwork, Mom. And I knew then that nothing she said would make this feel less like betrayal. But if I didn't go, she'd keep pushing. She'd show up at my door, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to face both of them together. Fine, I said finally. Where? She suggested a little place across town, a restaurant I'd never been to. My heart gave a dull thump of dread, but I told myself I was imagining things. When I got there, Anna was already waiting. She stood when she saw me coming around the table to hug me. I forced myself to let her. She smelled like the same expensive perfume she wore in high school, sweet and heavy enough to make me lightheaded. She ordered for both of us before I could protest. You'll love their Chardonnay, she said, waving off the waiter. I forced a smile and kept my hands folded in my lap. My palms were slick with sweat. Anna launched into a monologue about how hard things had been lately. Mark's debts, her legal bills, how they were just trying to be prepared. I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was stuck on the way her eyes kept flicking to my glass, the way she didn't touch hers. Mom? I looked up. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. Drink your wine. My heart stumbled. I'm not thirsty. Come on, you'll feel better. I wrapped my hand around the stem just to stop it shaking. I could see my reflection in the liquid, warped, small, scared. Why didn't you tell me about the policy? I asked, my voice so quiet I wasn't sure she'd hear it over the clink of silverware around us. She sighed. Because you overreact to everything, it's just insurance. I set the glass down without drinking. Then why forge my signature? Her jaw tightened. Mark handled the paperwork. Maybe it was a clerical error. You expect me to believe that? She didn't answer. She just stared at me across the table, her eyes dark. For the first time, I saw her as a stranger. I want you to cancel it, I said. That's not your decision, she snapped, then caught herself, smoothing her expression back into something pleasant. I mean, it's complicated. Let's not talk about it here. But we were already talking about it, and I wasn't going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to let you do this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Her smile thinned. You don't have a choice. I felt like the floor was tilting. My vision went blurry. I pressed my hands flat against the table. And that's when I knew she had put something in my drink. I stood too quickly. The room spun. My pulse throbbed in my temples. Sit down, Anna said sharply. I stumbled toward the bathroom instead. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I locked the door behind me and braced both hands on the sink. Don't panic, I told myself. Breathe. I pulled my phone from my purse and dialed 911 with clumsy fingers. When the operator answered, I whispered, "My daughter drugged me." The last thing I remember is the floor rushing up to meet me. When I woke in a hospital bed hours later, an IV in my arm and a nurse adjusting my blankets, I knew something had broken between Anna and me that could never be fixed. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was just an obstacle, and she'd almost succeeded in erasing me. The first thing I did when I got home from the hospital was pull every curtain closed. I sat in my living room, wrapped in the scratchy blanket they'd sent me home with, staring at nothing. My head still felt foggy, the sedative leaving behind a dull ache in my bones. But underneath the haze was something clearer than I'd felt in years, a sharp, cold certainty. I had spent most of my life believing love could excuse anything, that if you gave enough, forgave enough, eventually your children would remember how much you'd done for them. But there are lines you can't cross and ever come back. Anna had crossed hers the moment she tried to make sure I wouldn't wake up. That afternoon, Shirley came over again. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me and held my hand until I could speak. When I told her what happened, how I'd blacked out, how the toxicology report had confirmed a sedative, she squeezed my fingers so tight I thought she might break them. "You can't stay here," she said finally. "I'm not leaving," I whispered. "Elaine." "No," I said. My voice sounded different in my own ears, low and final. "I'm not running out of my own house." She studied me for a long time, then nodded. "Then we're going to protect you." The next morning, I called my lawyer, Richard Carver. I hadn't spoken to him since David died. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm but cautious. "Mrs. Whitaker, it's been a while. I need your help," I said. He must have heard something in my voice because he didn't ask me to explain over the phone. He set an appointment for the next day. I spent that night gathering everything I could think of. Bank statements, old tax forms, the policy documents, the medical report from the hospital. I dug out a cardboard box of old files from the hall closet, my hands shaking every time I thought about how close I'd come to not needing any of this ever again. When I walked into Richard's office, he stood to greet me, eyes going straight to the folder clutched in my arms. "I think you'd better sit down," he said gently. I laid everything out on the table between us. I told him about the insurance policy, the signatures I hadn't signed, the restaurant, the glass of wine I'd refused. I tried to keep my voice even, but when I got to the part about waking up in the hospital, it cracked in half. Richard listened without interrupting, only nodding as he made notes. When I finished, he closed his notebook. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said quietly, "you understand this is serious. This isn't something that goes away because you want to forgive them." I looked down at my hands, folded tight in my lap. My wedding band felt like it was burning a hole in my finger. "I know," I said. "Do you have any reason to believe they'll try again?" I thought about Anna's voice in the restaurant, the way Mark had sounded on the phone, so casual about making me worth more dead than alive. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then here's what we're going to do." Over the next 2 hours, he laid out a plan. First, we'd file paperwork to secure a protective order against Anna and Mark. Second, we'd freeze all accounts that listed them as beneficiaries. Third, we'd cancel the life insurance policy and notify the issuing company of the forgery. Finally, and this was the part that made my throat tighten, we'd update my will. I had always assumed Mark and Anna would split everything after I was gone. The house David and I bought, the small savings I'd scraped together. I'd pictured them sitting in this very living room, remembering birthdays and Christmases and every tiny act of love that built this family. But they'd traded all of that for $500,000 they hadn't earned. "Who do you want listed as beneficiaries?" Richard asked gently. I thought about it, about the look on Anna's face when I confronted her, about the way Mark had told me I didn't understand how this stuff worked. "My grandchildren," I said finally. My voice steadied. "In trust. They get everything when they're old enough. Until then, it's protected." He made a note, then looked up. "Elaine, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." When I left his office, the sky was bruised with clouds. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, every mile feeling longer than the one before. But when I pulled into my driveway and saw my front porch, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, a flicker of safety. I had spent so long believing I couldn't survive without my children's approval. Now I knew I could survive without them at all. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe that was what real freedom looked like. I thought filing the protective order would make me feel safer. It did, in a way, on paper. But paper can't stop the ache in your bones when you realize your own children might be planning how to get rid of you. The sheriff's deputies served Anna and Mark notice 2 days after I met with Richard. They didn't call. They didn't even text. The silence was almost worse than the shouting I'd expected. I started moving through my days like a ghost in my own life. I still brewed my morning coffee, still watered the plants, still tried to pretend the world hadn't tilted. But every creak of the floorboards, every shadow at the edge of the porch light, made my heart pound in my throat. That Thursday night, I was sitting in the living room sorting old photo albums. I don't know why I'd pulled them out. Maybe I was looking for proof that once it had been good. That once I'd been enough. The photos were full of small, forgotten moments. Mark at 6, beaming with a missing front tooth. Anna in her prom dress, flushed with excitement. David standing behind them with his hands on their shoulders, smiling like he'd never imagined they'd grow up to be strangers. I was still turning the pages when I heard the knock at the back door. It was nearly 9 o'clock. No one knocked at that hour unless something was wrong. I froze, listening. Another knock, louder, impatient. I stood and moved quietly into the kitchen. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see Mark's silhouette. He was wearing that old brown jacket he thought made him look respectable. His head was bowed, like he was bracing himself for an argument. "Mom," he called, his voice muffled by the door. "Open up. We need to talk." I didn't move. My breath felt stuck behind my ribs. "I'm not going away," he said after a moment. "Either you open this door or I come back with Anna, and we make this right." I thought of the restaurant, the taste of fear sharper than any drug. "No," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'm not letting you in." He hit the door with the flat of his palm, a sudden thud that made me jump. "Mom, stop being dramatic," he snapped. "This has gone too far. You're confused. You're sick. Anna said you've been acting unstable. Let us help you." "I don't want your help." "You don't know what you're doing." I swallowed. My hand was shaking so badly I pressed it against the counter to keep from dropping the phone. I'd promised Richard I'd call if they showed up. I'd promised Shirley, too. I dialed Richard first. Voicemail. I tried the sheriff's department next, my thumb fumbling over the screen. 911, what is your emergency? "My son is at my door," I whispered. "I have a protective order. He's trying to get inside." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Stay on the line with me. Officers are on their way." I backed away from the door, pressing myself into the corner where the stove met the wall. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs from the inside. "Mom!" Mark's voice rose, raw with anger. "You think you can just cut us out? You think you can take everything and leave us with nothing?" I closed my eyes. For a moment, I thought I heard David's voice, the way he'd sounded when Mark was little and inconsolable after losing a toy. "You don't have to give in just because he's yelling, Elaine." I took a shaky breath. "You need to leave," I said. Silence. Then, "You'll regret this," he hissed. Blue lights bloomed against the walls a moment later. Mark turned, his silhouette shifting. A deputy's voice barked an order I couldn't make out. The next minutes blurred, doors opening, footsteps pounding across the porch, Mark's voice raised in furious disbelief. I stayed in the corner, clutching the phone to my chest. A female deputy came inside, her face softening when she saw me. "Ma'am, you're safe now," she said. "He's being taken into custody for violating the order." I nodded, though my body felt like it belonged to someone else. After they left, the house was so quiet it roared in my ears. I sat back down at the table staring at the photo albums, my hand still trembling. The last time Mark had looked at me with love was years ago, before life had taught him that money mattered more. I thought there would be relief when he was gone. Instead, there was only a hollow space where hope used to live. I was alone, but I was alive. And for the first time, I understood those two things weren't the same and didn't have to be. The next morning, the deputy called to let me know Mark had been released on bail. She said it gently, like she expected me to fall apart, but there was nothing left to shatter. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring out the window at the backyard where my children had once played. The grass was damp with dew. The swing set David built was still standing, though the chains had rusted and the seats sagged. I thought about how many times I'd pushed them on that swing, how many times they'd begged, "Higher, Mama, higher." How simple love had been back then. Just the weight of a small body in your hands and the certainty that you were everything they needed. It was a long way from that memory to here. I spent the next few days in a kind of quiet survival mode. I changed the locks. I installed a security system. I called the insurance company and sent them copies of the forgery report, the protective order, the toxicology results. They told me the policy would be canceled immediately and that an investigation would be opened. The woman on the phone sounded horrified. She kept saying how sorry she was, how rare cases like mine were. I almost laughed. Rare didn't mean impossible. And I was living proof. Richard helped me finalize the new will. He arranged for the trust to be set up in my grandchildren's names, with strict provisions to keep Mark and Anna from ever touching it. He told me gently that there would be consequences, legal ones, financial ones, that it would be ugly before it got better. I told him I didn't care. I'd already survived the ugliest part. When the official letters went out, notification that they were removed from everything, I waited for the explosion, for the phone calls, the pounding on my door, but there was nothing. The silence stretched on day after day. It was strange how quiet could feel like both punishment and relief. I started walking in the evenings, just around the block. Sometimes I'd see neighbors I'd known for decades. They'd wave, cautious sympathy in their eyes, and I'd wave back. Some of them must have heard by now. Small towns don't keep secrets long. But no one asked, and I was grateful. One evening, as I was coming back up the walk, I found a small envelope tucked behind the screen door. My heart seized before I even picked it up. I braced myself for threats or pleading or blame, but it wasn't from Mark or Anna. It was from my granddaughter, Emily. Just 15, old enough to understand that something had happened, too young to know all the details. "Grandma, I don't know why Mom and Uncle Mark are mad, but I love you. I hope you're okay. If you want me to come visit, I will." There was a little heart drawn next to her name. I pressed the letter to my chest and let myself cry for the first time since the night Mark pounded on my door. Not because I was scared, but because I was still loved, even if it wasn't by the people I'd thought would never leave me. A week later, Richard called to tell me the insurance company had decided to pursue charges for fraud. My children, my own children, would be facing criminal penalties. I thought there would be satisfaction in hearing that, but there wasn't. There was only a kind of weary understanding. Some debts can't be paid back, and some betrayals can't be undone. I decided not to go to the hearings. Richard said he'd handle everything. Instead, I spent that day planting new flowers along the back fence. Marigolds, petunias, a few early chrysanthemums. As I pressed each root into the soil, I tried to think about something besides the past. I tried to imagine a future where I wasn't constantly checking over my shoulder. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun slide behind the trees. The house felt different somehow, emptier but cleaner, like the sickness had been drained out of it. My phone buzzed once on the table beside me, a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear more excuses or apologies that wouldn't be real. Instead, I turned the phone over so I couldn't see the screen. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to explain myself, no urge to beg for forgiveness I didn't owe. I took a slow breath and looked out at the garden, the soft shapes of the flowers in the dusk. I was alone. I was alive. And that was enough.